Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Christine, and the topic we chose is sports spectator fan violence. The article we picked is sport fan attitudes and willingness to commit aggressive acts. The topic of this article examines the sport domain of how team identification has a strong effect on fan inclination to engage in aggressive acts and behavior. Team identification meaning a fan's psychological connection to a team. Thus, team identification relates to sports fans' willingness to commit aggressive acts against opponents of a self-selected favorite team. Therefore, the purpose for this study is to replicate and extend the research conducted by previous study on participants' willingness to commit anonymous acts of instrumental aggression. This study consists of two hypotheses. The first hypothesis, team identification will be positively associated with willingness to commit anonymous acts of aggression, even after controlling for sports fandom. Hypothesis two, based on studies of aggression outside of sports, overall trait aggression will predict a willingness to commit anonymous acts of aggression. And Dominic will continue with the presentation.
I'm going to talk about the significance of the field with this study. This study is really important because athletes need to be able to do their jobs without being in danger of these aggressive fans. Every game has athletes play, both professional and amateur. They are harassed by the opposing fans. There are multiple instances of athletes receiving hate in the form of harsh words, racist remarks, and at times physical assault. Tennis star Monica Seles was stabbed, and NBA star Trae Young was spat on, just to name a few of these incidents. This type of hate can damage these young athletes' mental health, and all because of fans are overly aggressive. Now I'm going to talk about the literature review in this study. This study, they went over some of the previous studies that were done on fan aggression. Those studies went over three factors that play into the fan aggression. Those three factors are general aggression model, team identification, and trait aggression. There are a number of things in the general aggression model that could cause a fan to be aggressive, such as adverse conditions like heat or loud noises, drug and alcohol use, and general frustration about the game. Most acts of aggression by fans at sporting events are classified as instrumental aggression because they believe that they can help their team win by distracting their opponents. Fans have a lot of team identification, and they tend to be more hostile and therefore more likely to carry out these aggressive acts. Now Kayla's going to go over the methods.
So for the methods, they use participants enrolled in introductory sport and exercise psychology undergraduate courses participated in this study. Their ages ranged from 18 to 31 years, and 200 questionnaires were handed out and returned by the students. Sport fandom questionnaire, a 5-item Likert type scale questionnaire with anchors ranging from 1, which is strongly agree, to 8, disagree, to 8, strongly agree, was used in one part of the questionnaire. Team identification was measured using the sport spectator identification scale. The willingness of participants to commit anonymous acts of aggression was measured using the limits of behavior scale, which added questions from the study team. This scale, LOBS, was created to measure the most daring, occasionally outrageous acts that people would engage in. Trait aggression was measured using the brief aggression questionnaire, which is a 4-part, 12-item questionnaire. Means and standard deviations for the variables were calculated, and a frequency distribution table to show willingness to commit aggressive acts was created. Zero order and partial correlations were used to examine the first hypothesis, that team identification would be positively associated with willingness to commit anonymous acts of aggression against opponents, even after controlling for sport fandom. So on top of these participants, they also handed out to a select few universities for participants to fill out the same amounts of questionnaires to get 2 different aspects of the study. So from the results of the study were shown in table form, 4 different tables, each expressing different variables. They expressed that a large portion of individuals admitted at least some willingness to commit an act of aggression. This number decreased as the severity of the said act increased. So 53% and 45% admitted some willingness to trip a player or coach, respectively, whereas only 35% and 39% admitted some willingness to break the leg of a player or coach. Surprisingly, 17% admitted a willingness to murder a player or coach. Regarding controlling for sport fandom, the only significant relationship that remained was between the team identification and willingness to trip a player. Yet no significant relationship was found between genders. There was a positive relationship between team identification and trait aggression. Physical aggression and hostility predicted a willingness to commit aggressive acts. When examining differences in sport fandom and team identification by the level of sports participants' favorite teams, levels of sport fandom did not differ in those whose team's favorite team was a college team compared with those whose favorite team was a professional team. So now we are going to go over our key findings with Christine.
The key items from this study is that it is supported by both the hypothesis of team identification having a positive relationship with a desire to commit aggressive acts against opponents of their identified favorite team, and trait aggression being a potential predictor of committing anonymous acts of aggression. This as well supports previous studies that suggest that the stronger identification within a team, the greater the desire is of harming an opponent. This presents a threat to sports fans that highly identify with a particular team. Hence, the greater success of the team, the greater the fan will support that team in any way. Therefore, alcohol consumption, hot weathers, and on-field violence encourages hostility that portrays a big role in deciding a person's willingness to commit aggression. The researchers recommend two practical implications for reducing fan aggression, both incentric and eccentric measures. Incentric measures, the attempts to change violent attitudes like stadiums showing an encouraging message and being cautious of different types of music being played for opposing teams. Hence, anything to display less violent messages. Or an eccentric measure seeks to devise an alternation of possibilities for fans encouraging in violence. For example, the article states a creative precaution of increasing security to reduce any chance of violent interactions between fans, coaches, and players, which is a great option. Further study of this research is qualitative research of fans admitting a desire to commit aggressive acts to gain a better understanding of why they would indulge in such behaviors and what role their team identification plays in those behaviors, and examining more situational factors using the GAM as a framework. And Nick will conclude with the presentation.
All right, so this article discusses the effects that sports team affiliation has on fans, and when fan bases collide, how they react towards each other. So as previously mentioned, there are three main factors that influence this aggression, these being the GAM, the team identity, and the trait aggression in fans. The more diehard a fan is, the more likely they are to engage in these violent acts during the sporting events. This poses a problem for not only the security at the events, but also for the teams playing as well, as it impacts how they play their game, along with potentially putting them in danger. As the article doesn't take a biased stance, our group does not condone the violent actions between two fan bases. And I will continue on with the integration of faith. So these violent actions aren't Christian principles, as Colossians 3:8 tells us, but now put off all such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, abusive language from your mouth. So those that engage in these hostilities and altercations tend to be less Christian in nature, and this leads into an increase in their violent nature. These violent acts are fueled by anger and rage, as the scripture had previously mentioned, and is the work of the devil. And by allowing ourselves to be consumed by this, we are submitting ourselves to the doing of the work of the devil. We are to love one another as God intended us to. In John 13:34, he says to us, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another." So love is the strongest power in the world, as is intended by God. He invests love in us in order for us to invest love in others, come together in unity under the umbrella of Christianity. Thank you for listening to our presentation.